Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nancy Huddleston, and I'm the Communications Director at the Earth and Life Studies Division of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on the report that was released yesterday titled Off-Lake Sources of Airborne Dust in Owens Valley, California. You can now download a copy of the report and other supporting materials at our National Academies Press, nap.edu. A recording of this webinar will be available on our website in the coming days. For those of you not familiar with the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, we are private, nonprofit institutions that provide independent, objective analysis and advice to help solve complex problems and inform public policy decisions related to science, engineering, and medicine. For each requested study, panel members are chosen for their expertise and experience and serve pro bono to carry out the study's statement of task. The reports that result from the study represent the consensus view of the committee and must undergo external peer review before they're released, as did this report. Just a few reminders to our audience. Please note that the webinar is scheduled to last 1 hour. We'll start off with a presentation summarizing the report from the committee, and then we'll open it up to any questions you may have. To ask a question, just type it into the box below your video player labeled Slido. You can submit a question at any time during the presentation. So I'm very happy to introduce our main presenter for today, Dr. Ted Russell, who served as the chair of the committee that wrote the report. Dr. Russell is the Howard T. Tlepson Chair and Regents Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Georgia Tech. And he will be joined by 3 other committee members during the Q&A, who I will introduce then. So Dr. Russell, over to you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Owens Lake Scientific Advisory Panel, it's my privilege to present to you just a very brief description or summary of our report on the off-lake sources of airborne dust in the Owens Valley of California. I'm quite pleased to see all of your interest in this topic, recognizing that many of you are stakeholders in the air quality management in the Owens Valley planning area. My plan is for this presentation to be about 30 minutes long, providing about, half an hour for questions afterwards. Luckily, as noted, I'm going to be assisted by 3 of the committee members to help answer those questions. So first, and let's hope it does, okay, come on. As is always the case. There we go. I just want to start out with a land acknowledgement, noting that the National Academy buildings, but even more pertinent to what we're talking about here, is much of the Owens Valley, or the Owens Valley in particular, resides in the traditional territories of tribal peoples of their regions. And you'll actually note within our report, we view that it is important to be working with the tribal partners in the valley for managing land and air quality in the OVPA, the Owens Valley planning area. And this is very much seen in our recommendations and conclusions. So with that, I think most of you are probably pretty familiar with Owens Lake. It's located in the southern end of the Owens Valley and is bordered by the Sierra Nevadas to the west, White Inyo to the east, and the Coso Range to the south and east. Prior to the 20th century, Owens Lake was a closed basin saline lake of approximately 100 square miles. Beginning in about 1913, water was diverted from the Owens River into the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which eventually shrank Owens Lake to about 1/3 of its former area, leaving a brine pool surrounded by a dry lake bed. Once exposed, the lake bed produced large amounts of airborne dust under high winds. This resulted in the Owens Lake area being one of the largest sources of airborne particulate matter in the United States. And this includes particulate matter of aerodynamic diameter of 10 micrometers or less, what we call PM10. These small particles can penetrate into the lung and can cause or worsen a variety of health problems, such as asthma, bronchitis, and respiratory infections. To address this issue, LADWP, through their dust mitigation programs on Owens Lake, has implemented controls on over 49 square miles of the old lake bed to reduce emissions and comply with the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. As discussed later, and in the report, these on-lake controls are leading to reductions of PM10 levels in the OVPA. However, it's also leading to the what we find as off-lake sources contributing to elevated PM10 levels as well. I want to note up front, the Owens Lake situation is unique and complex, and having served on both the first committee as well as the second committee, I've gotten a real flavor for these complexity. It's a tough air quality management region. So before going into the panel's findings, I wanted to say something about the panel. It was established in 2014 as in response to a stipulated judgment, and the real reason for the panel is to foster an understanding and collaboration on scientific and technical approaches to dust control. We already had one report come out from a prior committee formulation, and that was, as shown here, looking at the effectiveness of dust control methods on lake sources. So that led or sort of drives this second study, which is really looking at off-lake sources. And here is a statement of our task. I don't want to go into detail of it, but you can see that it looks at developing information on off-lake dust sources in the OVPA, particularly those that can lead to exceedances. And as part of that, we're to look at the origin of significant off-lake dust sources and how they developed over time, look at potential options and recommendations to better characterize, monitor, and track changes in the PM10 contributions from these off-lake sources, look at what we can do to control those off-lake sources, and finally, if it's appropriate, if we deem it appropriate, we are to discuss the applicability of the US EPA's exceptional events policy. As you will note, we do address that. So with that in mind, a little bit on the study process. This study is specifically sponsored by the Great Basin Unified Air Pollution Control District and the LADWP. As part of our information gathering for this to develop this report, we had 7 information meetings. 4 were in person, and that included 2 days of intense field visits around Owens Lake. After developing the report, the first draft of the report, it was peer reviewed by 12 independent reviewers, and this process is overseen by 2 independent experts. I'll note by the depth and breadth of the reviewers' comments, it's obvious that they did a very thorough and comprehensive job, and their expertise showed itself. In terms of the committee, I listed here, but what I really want to do is just point out the breadth and depth of these committees. And having served on a number of National Academy committees, that's a real characteristic, is that it's a very capable bunch of individuals. And in this case, you'll see people like myself who have expertise in air quality, some who are experts in geology and geomorphology, some who are experts in various measurement techniques, luminescence, etc. Some who are experts in aeolian processes, hydrology, and such. So it's a great ecosystem management and such. So it's a great group of individuals to work with great expertise in the necessary areas that we are tasked with commenting on or addressing. So first, looking at sources of PM10 emissions in the basin, what the panel did as part of its process is we really looked at a wide range of available data on both on-lake as off-lakes and off-lake sources. It's really impossible to really adequately study off-lake sources without also knowing something about on-lake sources. And luckily, many of us on this panel were also on OLSAP 1, where we really dug into that. But But just if you look down the list, this is a range of data that we got from various sources, including from the project sponsors, LADWP and Great Basin. So looking at one of our first conclusion in terms of sources of PM10 emissions in the basin, what we have here on the left-hand side is utilizing the information provided is a summary of the type of sources that led to exceedances in the Owens Valley planning area. And just looking at this, let's just look at dirty socks. I'm going to address dirty socks in some more detail as we go. Is that you see this large yellow bar at the bottom that led to a majority of the exceedances at Dirty Socks was primarily from local off-lake sources. And this is looking at the 2022 to 2024 period. Similar at Keeler Dunes, and then you can look across. And at least when I sort of look at this this chart, you really get a feel for the importance of off-lake dust sources to exceedances of the PM10 National Ambient Air Quality standards. Though you also get a real appreciation that other sources also contribute. I'll note that smoke from wildfires does contribute has contributed as well during other years. Looking over time, this really is a story of a success leading to where we are now, is that if you look at the average of on-lake exceedances per monitor across the Owens Lake monitors, what you see is that the on-lake exceedances per monitor, the exceedances attributed to on-lake sources, has really dropped. This is a real testament to the success and activities of what have been done so far, where on-lake sources have been controlled. But at the same time, you see that the exceedances that are linked to off-lake sources really does not show this downward trend over time. So you see that that it's stayed somewhat more constant, with going up and going down depending upon the year. Thus, this decrease in the on-lake source impacts has really led to our being able to better identify, I'd say, the importance of off-lake sources to exceedances in the region. And just getting further into a specific example, because I think where this really shows is just how complex the system is. And that if you look at the Dirty Socks monitor located to the south and somewhat to the east, what you see is that you have a variety of potential sources around the monitor that can contribute. You have both on-lake as well as off-lake. And in terms of off-lake sources, you have the Olancha Dunes, you have the Vermilion Canyon alluvial fan complex, you have some washes up as well that could potentially, and also an impounded flood deposit that potentially could contribute. One of the things, and I want to really say thanks to to Great Basin for providing these, is that if we look at these essentially source polar plots, dust roses is sometimes they're called, is that you can identify where these exceedances are coming from. So the size of the circle is the magnitude of the observed air quality, and then the direction shows where it's coming from. And so you see that, not surprisingly, some is coming from the north on lake, and then you also have these off lake sources showing the potential contributions of the flood deposits, the alluvial fan, and La Lancha Dunes. And so just looking over time, this is a very similar story to what I just talked about, is that the on-lake impacts have gone down, whereas the off-lake impacts have varied over time, but still we see are significant contributors at present. When we look at the percent of exceedance attributed to source from off-lake sources, we see that the flood deposits and Alancha dunes are the primary contributors, though we also see that other sources can contribute as well. It's a very complex situation. As noted in our statement of task, is we were supposed to look at characterize emissions and emission fluxes. We did this by analyzing air quality concentrations with an air quality modeling approach, and just looking at two locations, Keeler and Dirty Socks. Let's first look at Keeler. We see that the on-lake source emissions have really gone down. In some ways, this graph might be a little misleading, because at first you may not notice that we're looking at a log scale. So this downward trend is actually quite significant. It's over an order of magnitude. So we've seen dramatic decreases in attributed emissions. We also see that off-lake emissions are also trending down, though not nearly so fast. When we go to Dirty Socks, we again, and I should note that the left-hand scale is now over 5 orders of magnitude. We see, again, this dramatic decrease in on-lake emissions during high wind events. But what we see is that the off-lake emission sources have trended both up as well as down, and then sort of they're trending back up again. Again, showing that this variability over time. So in terms of just an overall impression you might get, looking at sources of off-lake PM10 emissions, we see that the percent of exceedances attributed to flood deposits is the largest. One thing I should note about this diagram, as well as the prior one, is it can add up to over 100%, because some exceedance events are attributed to more than one source area. And so that's what you see here, is that if you add them all up, it does go over 100%. So flood deposits overall, the largest. Then you also have Alancha dunes and Keeler dunes, other sources, some up valley alluvial fans, etc. Again, we have a large variety of potential sources that have been identified to contribute. In terms of our recommendations, coming from our analyses to better characterize off-lake sources, what we see here is that they are composed of both observational approaches, including additional cameras, additional monitoring of PM10, more compositional analysis, etc., as well as modeling, and in particular, potentially using AirMod, which is another air quality model, in addition to the one that's currently being used, which is CalPUF, to characterize the off-lake sources and to characterize and quantify the impact of specific off-lake sources to PM10 exceedances around the Owens Valley planning area. Looking at the origin and evolution of the off-lake sources, one of the first issues I want to bring up is that if thinking back about presentations as well as a prior SIP and reports addressing PM10 in the Owens Valley planning area, there's this process called winnowing, or this, which refers to essentially the removal of dust from areas above, in this case, the regulatory shoreline, that had originally, or that were historically originating from the lake bed. Basically, the idea that as the lake bed emissions are controlled, the off-lake emissions would also drop to the point where they would not be contributing to exceedances. However, as evidence shows, just looking in particular, going back to that emissions plot that I showed earlier, is that over time, we don't see this downward trend in the off-lake emissions that we do see in the on-lake emissions. So we expect that in the future, winnowing will play a minimum role in further reducing PM10 exceedances. So When we look specifically at Keeler Dunes, we analyzed in particular two competing arguments or hypotheses about the cause of the destabilization of Keeler Dunes leading to the PM10 emissions. There was a hydrological argument and an aeolian argument as described here. And when we looked through the available scientific literature, the available data, it's our conclusion that the reactivation of the Keeler Dunes was related to the additional upwind sand supply from the Owens River Delta following the drainage of Owens Lake, and that due to this continuing aeolian activity, flood deposits, etc., the system will continue to contribute to PM10 emissions. Further stabilization of the dunes will likely reduce PM10 emissions. Continuing on with the Keeler Dunes, we did look and consider the impact of the construction of highway berms along the highway near the dunes, and it is uncertain as to the impact of those berms and their modification of sediment transport, what that has and will continue to do to PM10 emissions coming from flood deposits. So given that uncertainty, we recommend that the district should work with Caltrans and other stakeholders in the region to determine the impact of berms, not only these berms, but other berms on flood deposits, on emissions and resulting air quality in the OVPA. Now going to the south side, looking at flood deposits. When we looked around at various data, aerial shots, etc., what we do conclude is that flood deposits that may have been impacted by the rerouting of Highway 190 and its infrastructure, and these impounded flood deposits can impact PM10, though it's unclear to what extent these flood deposits may have had, or the modified infrastructure may have had on PM10. This is again an unknown, and similar to the last recommendation, the district should work with Caltrans and others to understand how the rerouting of Highway 190 and the related berms have impacted PM10 air quality in that region. Further on the south side of the lake, looking at Alancha Dunes, we do find that Alancha Dunes has extended slightly southward since the 1940s, but there's insufficient evidence to indicate how much of this extension was influenced by the drainage of the lake versus other anthropogenic activities, such as off-highway vehicle recreation and dispersed camping. So given this uncertainty, again, just for the air quality management, the district should work with the Bureau of Land and Management and other stakeholders involved in these issues to determine the impacts of recreational vehicle activity or recreational activity in general on the plant communities and PM10 emissions and air quality, and to remediate as needed. Going again to the north of the lake, there was some concern that potential activities may lead to increased emissions north of the lake. And when we looked at this and looked at the air quality data, what we concluded was that drought coupled with further water extraction, increasing water extraction, could result in a lowering groundwater table and potentially increase PM10 emissions from areas north of the lake. And as part of that conclusion is that continued monitoring and regular updates on revegetation projects can inform future air quality management, and this may be particularly important in the face of future climate pressures. So just one overall conclusion that sort of goes across sites of the origin and evolution of the sources is that coring and optically stimulated luminescence could target recent mobilization events such as Lancha dunes and Keeler dunes and the flood deposits to really reduce the uncertainty on the origin and evolution of these deposits, given the issues involved there. So we were tasked with, if appropriate, we should address if the EPA's exceptional events rule could be utilized, or how it would be utilized in the OVPA. And first, just what is an exceptional event? I want to first point out that doesn't mean it's infrequent. It's one that it has this definition shown here. And in particular, in the Owens Valley area, these are events that could come from high wind velocities leading to these dust storms. The EPA has used this 25-mile-per-hour threshold for California. If you look at the number of exceedance counts associated with wind speeds, you do see that right after about 25 mile per hour, you get this increase in it. Exceedance events. I will note that many of the ones between 20 and 25 are actually due to winds of 24 miles per hour or over. So very much it is these high wind events leading to these exceedances. So it sort of ticks that check mark. Just for the committee, we developed this sort of flow chart in terms of understanding the application of the exceptional events rule. And it shows you this division between being a natural source and potentially impacted by human activities, and these cutoffs due to wind speeds. With that in mind, what we concluded is that most of the exceedances from channelized flow deposits and sheet flow deposits, etc., and those that are impounded behind natural features, not anthropogenic features, appear to fit the exceptional events rule for natural events. On the other hand, for those sources that are potentially impacted by anthropogenic activities, we conclude that an assessment of the potential implementation of reasonable controls would be required. I will note, determining what controls are reasonable is beyond the panel's charge. That's much more of a policy question. And given such, the district should work with other applicable air quality agencies and other stakeholders in consideration. And as part of this, consider climate change as part of the consideration of reasonable controls. Informing off-lake dust control decisions, we looked at a variety of types of controls, and one of the major ones is that establishing native vegetation is the most stable and sustainable, and further, that tribal input into the evaluation of the various dust control measures should start at the very initial stages, its design, support, and implementation. Further, when we looked at other potential dust controls, we see that straw bales and straw checkerboards, both shown here, are potentially feasible and ecologically favorable, and potentially be used until native shrub communities become well established. And further, one should further look at recreational use, and its limitation may be feasible. In terms of flood deposits, that we look at this is a large potential source. In terms of near-term mitigation, we do see that gravel or cobbles in parallel with vegetation restoration might be viable, though we really couldn't identify any long-term cost-effective dust control measures for large-scale channel deposits, down gradient from the Keeler berms and from the remnants of Hurricane K. Improved drainage could potentially be used to reduce the flood deposits impounded behind the highways, and then hydrologic modifications of the berm structures. In addition to highway drainage studies, could reduce the size, or highway drainage could reduce the size of future dust sources. Just some overarching messages, and then we're done. I would just, as shown, and as really what led to the formation of this OLSAP 2 committee, is that we do find that off-lake source areas are a major source of PM10 exceedances in the Owens Valley. In particular, flood deposits along with Keeler and Olancha dunes were found to be the most frequent contributing sources. We do look at a number of different types of analyses to help us understand the impact of these sources on air quality, including both monitoring as well as modeling, air quality modeling. We do find that it is the essential events rule would be reasonable for application to natural areas, but for other areas, further study is required, particularly to quantify their contribution to the exceedances and what might be viewed as reasonable controls. In terms of dust control options, we found that natural vegetation would be most sustainable in the long run, and that vegetation and natural roughness on sand dunes would be a potential source. Other ones are listed there. And finally, early engagement with with local tribal nations should start from the get-go, in essence, to bring them in. And further, that one should consider resilience under climate change. So with that, just a couple notes is that the report is now available, as shown there, and a printed version will be published by September. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions. And so I guess, Nancy, you're going to be moderating.
Thank you very much, Dr. Russell. That was a great overview. We're going to turn to the Q&A now, and I'm going to introduce three more committee members in a minute. I do want to remind the audience to ask a question, please type it into the box below your video player. So we are now joined by three other members of the committee: Danny Orr from the University of Nevada, Reno, Scott Van Pelt from the USDA, and Raya Bahraini from UC Riverside. So we welcome you guys, and I think we're going to have a first question here. Have there been any preliminary or pilot native revegetation efforts on Keeler and Olancha dunes to date? If so, were they successful?
So does anyone want to take that? I mean, there are actually, Scott, I'll let you talk.
Yeah, I'll take
talking.
Okay. Yes, in fact, there was a study, and it's still ongoing, that they actually planted nursery-grown seedlings of 4 species, and including greasewood on the Keeler dunes in the areas protected by the hay bales. And this was a study. This was actually a project undertaken by the district with funds supplied by the Department of Water and Power. This was initiated in, I believe, 2014. It's been very successful. And in fact, the shrubs, as they've grown up, are starting to produce seed, and natural colonization is taking place on the Keeler dunes.
And indeed, if you think back about some of the presentations, we saw that off-lake sources around Keeler are shown to be decreasing. And I just want to reiterate what Scott said about the success. Did anyone else from the panel want to contribute further?
Okay. So another question: could you describe the detection of human health impacts for communities around Owens Valley recently and over time?
So I can, that was really not part of our charge. So we did not we did not investigate specific health outcomes that may have been contributed from the PM10 levels in the valley.
Okay. In what ways could this report influence how the rule, I suppose the exceptional events rule, is applied to interpreted in regions with dynamic dust sources like Owens Valley?
With that is that one of the activities or points that the panel went into was looking at the type of the origin and development of these sources over time. That section that we described sort of in the middle of the talk, and in particular, what it identifies are those sources that would be viewed as natural versus those that are viewed as anthropogenically impacted. And the exceptional events rule sort of separates these two in terms of how what sort of controls would be potentially required. So this report very much provides some of those details that could be used by the stakeholders in the region to determine how specifically to apply the exceptional events rule. So with that, though, again, anyone else? Danny, Scott, Roya, do you want to say anything further? And hopefully that fully addressed the question.
It's suddenly dark outside, so I'm all right. Earlier this year, a grass fire in the North Owens Valley led to dust emission from the burned area and a subsequent windstorm. Does the report consider the role of possible dust emissions post potential fires in the Up Valley areas?
It did not go into looking at post-fire potential increases in dust.
But we did consider, and mention in the report the potential impact of climate change and other pressures, that this would be one of them. They are regional of nature. They are not within the mandate that we are looking around the lake, but they are important to know, recognize, and monitor.
Yeah, thanks, Danny, for that clarification. Very, indeed, as we do discuss the potential impact of climate change. And we know, fires are one of those that have been found to be responsive to climate change.
Even though it wasn't our specific mandate, we did recognize that some of the dust leading to exceedances could come from the northern part of the valley.
Yeah, okay. Were there any surprising discoveries or areas that were previously overlooked in terms of dust generation?
I don't know, Ted, if a winnowing would be a surprise, but it went counter to the previous notions that winnowing will take effect and take care of the exposed emissive surfaces, but in reality, this was not the case. So I don't know if it is a surprise. I don't know. Everyone will have their own threshold for surprises. This was one that was not obvious from the outset.
I think also flash deposits, I didn't expect. Flood deposit, not flash deposit. Flood deposit, I didn't expect to be contributing to a large fraction of the exceedances.
Yeah, so it goes to the same idea that there is a renewal, natural renewal. I mean, their location may be shaped by structures and whatnot, but these are the sources of dust are renewable, and therefore winnowing that should take care of this over time is not is happening, but it's not an important process.
And just to point out that the flash flood deposits are an infrequent occurrence, but they have happened throughout history in the natural history of the valley.
All right. Okay, here's another question. How should considerations of cultural resources be incorporated into the planning of future dust mitigation plans?
So I will start out. just noting, as noted in the report, we think it's important to have the tribal partners involved very much up front and recognize that they are in a position to identify what the cultural resources are and how essentially they, as a major stakeholder, should they view that they should be maintained. So it's very much inclusion of the tribal partners, and actually I'll say other stakeholders in the region that may also view other cultural resources as being important. You know, there's a long history there. Then they should be included in the planning and execution process. Others?
To add to that? Okay. Are there lessons from Owens Lake that could be applied to other arid or semi-arid regions facing similar issues?
I will start. Oh, Danny. Danny has his hand up.
No, it's okay. But briefly, in arid regions, as you know, people are after water sources. So extraction of surface and subsurface water resources are likely to enhance the surface emissivity. And so many of the lessons we learned from Owens Valley can be applied to other areas and arid regions in which water resources are being diverted to human or other usage, and therefore enhancing the capacity of those generally dry surfaces or recently became dry surfaces to emit particles. Yeah, Ted, back to you.
What I was going to go is that one of the things that really comes out from this report, at least to me, is the complexity of these arid regions and the complexity of and variety of types of sources that you have, and that it's really not just one type of source and that one type of control will work. In that, you know, in this case, we have these washes and flood deposits and the dunes. They all have different emissivities. They will respond to different controls. So one should not expect going into this that it's a one size fits all, both in terms of location or in terms of controls. Another one that comes out of this is that as you control one source, you will likely find that other sources are there that are going to become significant contributors to your air quality issue. You know, what they very much found here was that controlling the on-lake sources led to dramatic improvements in reductions of the levels and frequency of the exceedances. And then you see that these off-lake sources that may have been expected to be sort of minor contributors become the larger contributors. So I think that's another lesson that one might learn. I would also say that the success that they've had on Keeler Dunes is a lesson that should be learned, is that, you know, there are types of controls that will work. It may take longer than hoped or planned. You know, arid environments are not necessarily the fastest responding. So, Scott, well,
Yeah,
Danny.
I would like to address the interactions of water erosion and wind erosion and steps that could be taken to control the amount of sediment delivered to the area. And that if we spread the water coming out of these canyons from flash flood events, we allow that water to lose much of its erosive energy, allow that water to soak into the ground, provide more water available for native plant establishment, and in so doing, we drop the velocity of wind in some of these areas because of the friction afforded by the shrub canopies, and limit the amount of fresh sediment delivered to the to the lake surface and to the immediate surrounding shorelines.
I just want to add one more thing about lessons and stating the obvious, the immense success of the on-lake mitigation plans. I think this is a world-class example of how, how collaborative work and effort into addressing a problem like this with multiple types of solutions are textbook examples for how this should be done in other dried lakes in the world. So, good lessons we also have here.
Great, thanks. So here's one related to the previous question. Are tribal partners involved in OLSAP or in this report process?
Absolutely. And I can tell you they were present and involved in, I think, most every in-person meeting that I can recall. And we sought their input in terms of some very specific issues that arose during the deliberations, and they were reviewed at I do believe in the review process. So yes, they were involved throughout, pretty much from the first meeting onwards, and very much so. I think you see, and certainly how we've used their involvement, and we very much appreciate their involvement through the process.
Okay. For flood deposits, did the panel evaluate scenarios such as 1, when lakebed sand could saltate into stabilized flood deposits, making them emissive, or 2, when sand deposits from the lake can migrate up fans and become recycled within flash floods?
Yes, we did look at that. The flash flood deposits are silty and clayey, and as such, the particle sizes are smaller than the ideal, most easily entrained particles by the wind. And those particles are in the sand size range. So limiting the amount of sand from sand sheets and from dune fields that could saltate onto the flood deposits, or protecting the flood deposits by much larger deposits of gravel and or cobbles, would limit the ability of that saltating sand to impact those flash flood deposits and make them emissive. We also looked at the natural emissivities of the sand materials themselves. Some of the dune fields, particularly Keeler dunes, are an interaction of sand sheet movement from the lake from the north onto this area, and destabilization of the previously stabilized dunes, as well as flood deposits coming down the Centennial Wash. And so there's a natural layering or lamination of fines and sand materials that lead to the dust emissivity from the Keeler dunes.
Yeah.
Danny, anything to add?
No, yeah. So the short answer is yes, we have considered it. It's a prominent feature in our attribution, for example, of the Keeler dune destabilization. So exactly these 2 points were prominent throughout the report.
Thank you. And a related question, have sedimentological studies been done of the properties, the grain size, composition, et cetera, of the sands and sediments in the different near lake sites, which could help guide the most appropriate site specific mitigation measures?
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit and then maybe hand it over to Scott and others. So yeah, we, as the audience should know, we have not collected new data. We basically harvested information from reports and existing publications of the area, on the area, and many of those talked about the properties, mineralogical, grain size, and sources of the sands. So we have looked into that, and we actually felt that more information need to be acquired along those lines to to constrain the attribution, and we wrote about it in one of our conclusions. So we have looked at it both in terms of attribution, mitigation. It's a coarse-grained approach. We're not looking exactly at the grain sizes, but at the functions of those sand sources as activators of emissive surfaces. And that's the mitigation that we are planning is around that idea. So.
And I want to also note that, as Danny said, that was one of our conclusions in terms of doing further sedimentological studies, in particular coring and things like that, is very much a conclusion of the panel, but also looking at air quality that results from it, and to better understand the composition of the actual PM10 found in and around the lake.
Well, one of the interesting techniques that's been used in the past to date the sediments and the layers of the sediments in these areas is optically stimulated luminescence. And that is that when a quartz grain or feldspar or other minerals are exposed to sunlight, they bleach. And once they're buried, they start to accumulate a charge. And looking at the intensity of that charge versus what the particle has when it's bleached gives a very, very good estimate of time. In some cases, within 25 years of when the particle was buried. And one of our panel members, interestingly enough, was an expert in that technique.
Good. Okay, so how much has man-made infrastructure impacted flood deposits around the lake? We pointed to the things that did it, but how much, I guess, is the question here. To what degree?
I'll start that one out.
Okay.
Probably the most impactful anthropogenic activity is the construction of highways, the diversion of water into culverts to go underneath the highway is very impactful on the depth of channels cut by water coming down the alluvial fans from natural overland flow, and delivery of water into imponded pools from the raised roadways that are unable to drain and so just remain until evaporated.
Okay, and any other answers to that question? So to be clear, extraction of resources are contributing to off-lake sources? So the extraction of resources.
I guess the person who posed the question talks about water extraction, I imagine. Well, remarkably, the water table around the lake remains stable even as the lake been drained for almost a century. And so so far to date, there were not much, if we're talking about water, there was not much pumping from that area. And so the subsurface groundwater picture remains basically static. It's a very resilient system in that sense. Of course, if in the future extraction will take place, then all bets are off.
Thank you. New question. Did you look into the use of any other models besides AirMod? If so, what were some disadvantages of them?
So yeah, we did. And if you look at the report, we also looked and considered and thought about models like WRF-Chem, which was actually one of the reasons looking at that was that LADWP's contractors had done some preliminary applications. So WRF-Chem is an Eulerian model, similar to as is CMAQ. This is EPA's Community Multi-Scale Air Quality Model. And those would be applicable as we note. Some of the disadvantages of those. So AirMod actually has this huge advantage. It's relatively straightforward, computationally efficient approach. And actually it provides quite quite directly this source area to air quality relationship. It does that. It's very clean. And those two benefits, along with being an EPA model, really drove why we said consider AirMod. If you start looking at WRF, Chem, and CMAQ, those have some other benefits. They provide more of this more regional representation, but they're computationally more expensive, and they actually require sort of I would say, a little bit elevated user capability. And more processing of the emissions, et cetera. So those are some of the disadvantages of those. Certainly they could be used. And I think it's up to the air quality stakeholders in the region to really decide what works best for them. Note, we say the use of AirMod instead of, or in, I guess, in conjunction with CalPUF. CalPUF is also, it's been used very well in the region. And it has it's sort of some of the benefits on efficiency. So they're all quite viable, and it's really up to the air quality stakeholders in the region to see sort of how they look at the various positives and negatives.
Right. Thanks, Ted. We have time for just 2 more questions. So this one is a follow-on to the one about resource water extraction. How would further groundwater pumping around Owens Lake impact current vegetation, and could it lead to more emissive source areas?
First, it's beyond our scope. It's hypothetical. We don't really have any data. I would just say that the stack of aquifer under the lake is quite complicated, and quite those aquifers tend to be isolated from each other. So a lot more study needs to be, a lot more data are needed to kind of address this, because it depends on what the climate will do, what the pumping will do, where it's going to be pumped from, before we can attribute any of those actions to changes in vegetation. I hope I don't sound like a lawyer. I'm not, but this is basically the reality of this.
Thanks, Danny. Okay, so final question. What are the potential consequences of inaction, both for public health and for compliance with the air quality standards? You get to make the case for the report.
Well, first, I want to reiterate, we've seen the real benefits from the controls that are already in place. So inaction will mean that we won't really get to, in some ways, fully benefit from those controls that are being put on the lake, because we're still going to have these exceedances that are now coming from off lake. So there will be, you are going to continue to have adverse health outcomes associated with high levels of PM10, as well as other issues in terms of, you now have this area that has to do further work in terms of controls to reduce PM10. And, in terms of inaction, let me put it this way, is that with the correct actions, where you're truly identifying the most emissive areas from off-lake sources, you can target those controls and reap those benefits. So it's actually, I would say, the correct actions where that really leads to the information needed to best improve air quality in the region is a huge win, I think, for the area. So that I put as a real meaning of this report, is that you've seen these tremendous advances from on-lake controls. You can reap them from off-lake controls as well.
We're just now starting to understand how impactive on human health dust actually is. Current estimates are that atmospheric dust and wind erosion cost the American economy close to $154 billion annually. And the largest part of that is hospitalization and lost productivity due to health impacts.
All right. So we are at the 3 o'clock hour.
But before we go, I
Uh-huh.
just, as the committee chair, I truly want to thank the National Academy staff, Stephanie, Thomasina, and I really want to have a shout out now to Margot Regier, in that she was our primary project officer throughout the study and has recently left for bigger and better things. Well, maybe not better. We like maybe to think not, but
Different.
thanks to Margot.
Thanks, Ted. And on behalf of the academies, I just want to thank all of you and all the committee members for conducting this great study. I want to remind everyone again that you can download a copy of the full report for free at nap.edu. It's our National Academies Press, and access a recording of this session on the National Academies website in the next few days. I think it'll be up. And so thanks again, speakers, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. Bye-bye.